Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the third iteration of our Architecture Alumni Talk series. My name is Professor Cameron Broon. I'm the Dean and Head of School at the University of Queensland School of Architecture. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which many of us meet today. I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants, who continue cultural and spiritual connections to place. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'd like to just run through a few housekeeping points which are noted on the slides on the screen. Some of you who have joined us in previous sessions will know that today's session is being recorded, and so that you might have noticed that all of the attendees are muted and are able to share their video. This is just to help us manage the large number of people participating in the session and to preserve our bandwidth, which I know is very precious at this time. So after Paul's presentation concludes, we'll have a live Q&A session. So if you'd like to ask Paul a question, click on the Q&A icon, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and type your question in there. We'll then relay your questions during the Q&A session. We hope to be able to get through all of your questions, but apologies in advance if we do miss you. If you are having any technical problems at any point during tonight's session, please click on the chat icon, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and let us know, and we'll do our very best to help. So we know that some of you are using your attendance this evening as part of your annual continuing professional development program. And we'll send you a follow-up email in the coming days that will serve as your confirmation of attendance. And we'll also include a few questions that you can ponder in documenting your attendance this evening. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our presenter for this evening, Paul Curry. And I'm going to read you a few words about him. Paul graduated from the University of Queensland with a Master of Architecture in 2009 and is now a valued member of the COX leadership team. He has a depth of experience and background across projects spanning diverse sectors, including significant residential, hotel, sports, civic, educational, retail, commercial, and justice projects. This breadth of knowledge allows Paul to embed a degree of richness and design knowledge on each of his projects, and he's involved with leading large teams in design, documentation, and administration. Paul is a passionate and enthusiastic design advocate with a focus on steering client relationships and championing the use of innovative methodologies. He consistently demonstrates an innate ability to deliver high-quality architecture, offering well-designed spaces for people while celebrating every project's broader context. Paul has led the COX Melbourne studio through numerous significant award-winning projects, including Melbourne Square and the Christchurch Justice and Emergency Services Precinct. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming Paul Curry? Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Cameron. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us and thanks for the introduction, Cameron. Cameron got in touch with me a few weeks ago and asked me to present a bit of a story of architecture post university. And I thought a good way to do that might be to focus on a few of the significant projects that I've had the opportunity to be involved in through the process. And then through that journey, we'll, I guess, if anyone has any questions or anything, and put them forward and we can have a bit of a discussion at the end there. Over the years, with the different projects that we work on, obviously that's come with an opportunity to work and travel to different locations around the world, which has been pretty amazing, and seeing different areas and working in different areas and different ways of doing things and different environments has really been a great thing to do. So the projects that I thought I might focus on today would be the Christchurch Justice and Emergency Services Precinct, which was the first government anchor project after the 2011 earthquakes. Melbourne Square, which is a major mixed-use project in Melbourne. I'll touch on the Green Spine or South Bank by Beulah, which has obviously had a lot of media coverage lately. And then just some of the different things that we're doing in the office as well. Before we get into that, I guess I just wanted to start with a little bit about who we are and what we do as an Australian practice. This year has been very different to any other, obviously. So basically, working from 6 studios, or what has now become 600 offices around Australia, has been a really interesting thing, and really relying on our relationships and collaboration with one another has been key to the success of being able to do that in a remote world. From our different offices, working on projects all over the world of different types. So it's really been a pretty amazing experience. A little bit about COX in that we focus on many different project types, and we refer to something known as typological evolution. So how do we actually evolve each type of project that we're doing and make it better each time? And with that comes a real focus of where we think there's a lot of delight, which is in the public life and the public realm. And then we kind of have four pillars of our ethos, being structure, craft, art, and nature. So how do we build with, and how do we design with structure, and how do we do it lightly and express the structure? And a lot of that comes from Philip Cox's real beginnings through significant projects like Rod Laver Arena and Sydney Football Stadium. Craft. So how do we piece the buildings together, and how do we design the details to be beautiful details? The integration of art and nature being different for each project as well. And then all of these aspects is what gives our projects a bit of character. This is a shot of our Melbourne office, so where we're working from, or where we were working from. So it's a pretty amazing environment and highly collaborative, where our whole office is involved in each of the projects and has the ability to contribute, which makes it a really fun and exciting place. With that, we do get together socially, and myself and my partners, we're all friends, and we hang out and do different things outside of the office as well. So these are a few little photos from a property down on the south coast of New South Wales that Philip Cox owns, and been lucky enough to organise a few trips up there, which is basically off grid in a pristine environment that he has done different works across the property over the years, getting together and having a bit of a jazz concert in the middle of the bush in this great setting, and then talking about all things ranging from architecture to life in the evening around a few glasses of wine and a fire. Some of the projects that we are doing from Melbourne, and people will recognise some of them there, but really ranging in all different scales, from the design of a watch through to larger projects like the Justice Precinct in Christchurch, or Melbourne Square, or South Bank by Beulah. So really working across all ends of the spectrum and all types as well. So back in 2011, after the earthquakes that really devastated Christchurch, we were lucky enough to be successful in picking up the project for what's now known as the Christchurch Justice and Emergency Services Precinct, which after the earthquake, and I've included a few photos here of the different environments, but many of the existing city fabric was just totally destroyed. and something like 700 buildings in the CBD alone were demolished. So the New Zealand government saw it as a real opportunity to consolidate all of the courts, so the multi-jurisdiction courts, with the headquarters for all the emergency services for Canterbury into one precinct. So it was a great opportunity to really start to revitalise the city centre and try and get some activation back in there. So you had this complete juxtaposition of the beautiful Avon River, which is in the top left there, through to the devastation of the CBD, and it was pretty unbelievable experience. The beautiful old cathedral that stood in the middle of Christchurch, and how it was straight after the earthquake. So this is a satellite image of Christchurch CBD prior to the earthquake, and then post-earthquake, and obviously the total devastation that happened throughout there. So going back to visit Christchurch in the immediate aftermath was just something else. Highlighted in red there was the site that was identified for the new Justice Precinct. So what was originally 2 city blocks was to become this major new civic precinct. Within the project, just I guess a little snapshot as to what the project was 42,000 square metres of built area, 19 courtrooms, along with all of the emergency services, and then some extra numbers there. With the emergency services was a requirement for post-disaster recovery, so designing parts of the precinct to have over 72 hours of emergency operations resilience. So if all systems and support were cut off, the critical precinct components would need to continue to operate for 72 hours on their own. As a project, we worked with 2 New Zealand practices, Opus and Warren and Marnie, and worked collaboratively through all stages of the project. And we came up with the initial concept that was really around designing a new public space as a central square in the middle of the project, and having these new courtrooms with great transparency, natural light, and connection to the outside surrounding the space, along with the emergency services there on the right-hand side. And really looking at the idea of the transparency of justice, in that it's a transparent process, and with that through the process is a heightened stress, and how do we really try and calm down that environment? So designing the spaces for people to lower the stress was really important. How we designed the precinct from a resilience point of view, an earthquake design post the 2011 earthquakes was something that no one had really seen before, in that there was a whole range of new requirements, and there weren't really many benchmarks that we could draw on to look at how we needed to design for the different pieces. And there's some shots of just the central space that we created. But with the earthquakes, there's something called base isolation. So allowing for movement between different levels of a building, which is quite typical to bridge design. And what the problem we were tasked with was really, how do we design a precinct across 2 city blocks that needed to be an importance level 4, so the highest level rating that we could, and incorporate a movement arrangement between the ground floor and level 1 of plus or minus 625 millimetres, so 1.25 metres of total horizontal movement. Was just out of this world. And then the largest amounts of movement in the precinct, with the largest movement joiner being plus or minus 865 millimetres, was was really something that we weren't used to, certainly from an Australian point of view. With that, and with the spaces through the precinct, was a great degree of complexity in terms of the design and documentation. And these are some shots of our construction documentation being delivered to site. So there was just over half a tonne of paper and delivered to site on a trailer behind a car, and then picked up by the tower crane to drop it into the site sheds. For that was 5 copies of documentation which we had a requirement to provide. The earthquake design obviously was a pretty incredible thing to work through, and this is a photo of just the ground floor slab alone, and the amount of steelwork and reinforcement moving through it, moving through to a construction photo with the ground floor structure and some quite large columns that were basically on a typical 8 to 9 metre grid, and the black tops that you're seeing there are all of the base isolators that allow for the movement, and the columns that didn't have the black tops of them, they're a different type of isolator, which is basically using a stainless steel mirror polished plate sitting on top of a pad of Teflon to allow for that movement. And there's some construction photos of those pieces. So basically we were designing a rigid structure at the ground level to enable the 4-storey building above to slide in an earthquake. So the ground floor would move in the earthquake and the building above would stay reasonably still. And with that came the opportunity to express some of these systems through different aspects of the design of the building. So on the left hand there is an image of the stainless steel plate and Teflon, and then on the right hand side is what's known as a lead rubber bearing, which basically wobbles in an earthquake. With that though comes all of the other complexity around how do we design lift shafts and escalators, and where do we allow for the movement. So in this case, all of our lift shafts actually hung from the building above, and the whole lift shaft would stay still in an earthquake while the ground floor would move around it. And a level of structural design that was certainly something that we weren't used to over here. The project it really had a fantastic outcome in that what we were able to do through the process and the support of the client and the stakeholder group was really set a new benchmark for courts and justice design that really played up the idea of transparency, of the transparency of justice, connection to the outside, and the calming environments that come with that. Interesting components around the separation of emergency services to the courts. Whilst the co-location brings great opportunities, there's also other things that we needed to consider in the design, in that the police, for example, were part of the precinct as well. Some of the photos of just around the precinct here before it was actually opened. Obviously, not too many people around in these photos. Once it actually opened, though, I had the opportunity to go over for the New Zealand Awards presentations and able to go through the finished building, which was really amazing to do. And this is some photos of the central atrium space. So as you enter the building and you rise to the elevated ground level, in effect level 1, which looks out onto the courtyard, we had this great atrium space with visual connections to all of the public galleries and the courtrooms, and then the judicial chambers that you can see in the top level there, and deliberately designing all of the internal glazing to be clear and transparent, Again, really just emphasising that idea of transparency. The courtrooms themselves were designed to really incorporate as much natural light and materiality as possible. All of the services being hidden, but at the same time dealing with the complexity that we had to address this requirement for in between every level above that ground level 1 movement point. We had to allow for plus or minus 25 millimetres of movement between the ceilings and the walls. So basically 50 millimetres of horizontal movement. And integrating all of the services so that we could have this beautiful, seamless courtroom that didn't have visible surfaces in it was really important from our point of view. And then really looking to push the idea of arbitration and mediation in the courtroom and testing out new courtroom designs for different purposes. And then with that came the opportunity to work closely with a number of local Maori artists through different aspects of the project. And this is a photo of the Maori Land and Environment Court. And you can see some of the artwork integrated into the column cladding there, which really gave it quite a beautiful texture. And the idea that artwork is a common language recognised by all, that everybody can appreciate. That artwork varied in different scales from the timber work that I just showed through to an entire facade, where every one of these feathers were designed and laser cut by a local artist. And then going back to a smaller detail where we had individual door handles that were carved for the Maori Land and Environment Court, through to etching and engraving in stonework and the patterns in the text and the tactiles at the base of the stairs there. And the horizontal line that you can see there through the image is that line that is moving the plus or minus 625 millimetres. So designing it beautifully that it was functional, but also just a beautiful thing through the design was really important. And then other components of the project where artists were involved through the ceiling panels in this image, or even our take on how we integrate the idea of the horizontal movement into the cladding of the meeting room, in this case with the timber battens there and the horizontal joints, taking the idea of that horizontal banding and designing it into the interior materiality. From there, moving into Melbourne Square, which has been a really exciting journey, and a project that we've been fortunate enough to work on for the last 5.5 years now, which started with a design competition back in 2014, where our client, OSK Property, had a very high level brief and an aspiration to leave a lasting legacy for the city of Melbourne, really recognising that this would be their first project in Melbourne, and they wanted to make sure that they were really doing the right thing for the city. So part of our idea with the competition was the idea that great cities are built around great public space, and public spaces are really a big part of what makes our cities fantastic. More recently, back then, Melbourne was the world's most livable city. Melbourne's now the second most livable city. So really looking at improving the public realm is really key to keeping Melbourne's status around as a global city, and hopefully Melbourne will become the world's most livable city again. With these public spaces, we really need to be creating identity, and with identity comes a community. With Melbourne, we've had this concept that we've been working on for quite some time now, which is the idea of the passeggiata, or the journey along the river, or the river stroll, and the network of projects that we've been able to be involved in and work on throughout the city, and basically the gateway between the two main rail entrances into Melbourne, being Richmond Station and North Melbourne Station, and then all of the connections in between. So there's a few projects that come through there, and then Melbourne Square, being positioned in South Bank, is this great opportunity to really take that idea and look at how we can improve South Bank as well. So starting the project, looking at what is around South Bank, from the beautiful river promenade and the Botanic Gardens that are just a short walk away, through to the great civic precincts and facilities that are there, such as the National Gallery of Victoria. And doing some stat analysis on what is currently in South Bank, and how many people are there and what it needs as a city. And although South Bank has these great pieces of amenity within South Bank, or very close to it, South Bank itself didn't have a lot of green space. So I thought, what an opportunity to add to South Bank's green space and create a new public park, in addition to the work that Melbourne City Council's been doing, greening South Bank Boulevard, which is currently happening, and Boyd Park. So with those projects over the last 5 years, there's almost a doubling in the amount of green space for South Bank. And then looking at who is living in South Bank and their different situations, and comparing those to broader Melbourne, and what those pieces of information might suggest that we should be looking at. And in a snapshot, we thought there was a great opportunity through the project as basically the last consolidated site in South Bank to be giving the residents this great retail amenity. So looking at things like fresh food, restaurants, cafes, and other lifestyle pieces away from the riverbank was really important. The idea of health, childcare, recreation, and then the green open space. So the vision was to create this new place that really could become a destination or a link piece between the CBD and the Yarra through to the Botanic Gardens and the sports precinct, centred around three key pieces, being public green open space, the community amenity, and then everything that we need to create a livable neighbourhood. And just some early sketches and watercolours as to what those environments might be like. And with that comes a whole range of elements that we wanted to be incorporating into the design. Lots of model testing, and when we started the project, the planning controls at the time were basically a 100-metre height limit that would allow us to do something like some of the smaller models in the foreground there. And the provision of very, very limited public space or urban realm works. And through the process of around 6 months working with the authorities and the client, we basically came up with the master plan that created almost a 4,000 square metre park network surrounded by active retail and a mixed-use precinct with residential, workplace and hotel, which is really something different for South Bank. And some of our very early master plan concept renders from 2015 through here, with the main park in the centre there. So the buildings at the time were not yet designed, more of a principle around their massing. So that master plan included, working clockwise, a 600-room hotel, the 4 residential towers at the south there, and the workplace tower with full activated podiums, surrounded by this new laneway and park network. And some of the views looking down onto that verdant park space. So when we actually came to designing the project, stage 1 is in construction now, and due to be completed later this year. The master plan evolved, but really all of the key principles that we had from 2015 really were maintained. And this is the updated master plan piece with stage 1 in the centre there. But really all of the principles that we had were really maintained to be true. Designing stage 1, we really started to break open the idea of what apartment living is and how we improve the amenity for each of the residents within the towers, and design the towers that had a pleated form where that pleat rotated through each level of the tower to really position the views further away from the adjacent towers, and give a broader context view, but also to give the towers the beautiful sculptural form, drawing on the idea of the nearby arts precinct, and the idea that these towers could be designed as a beautiful but functional pair of sculptures perched on the park at the gateway to the city. And some of the early renders of what stage 1 is, with the pleats moving through, and the park and the entry boulevard, and then a view of stage 1 prior to the future stages being delivered. And the view to the south over Albert Park Lake and the bay. And then just some recent construction photos of those, and where really those ideas and concepts are really showing to be coming to life. So these are some of the photos that I've taken just last week there, with the podium in the foreground and the 2 towers beyond. The pleated facade moving through, and looking closely, you'll see that the smaller pleat is not getting smaller with the perspective, it's actually getting larger, which gives this interesting effect with what you expect the perspective to be doing. And what will become the retail entrance at the base there, with the white granite band folding up and the park behind it to connect to a level 1 retail, and the childcare up on level 2. And the view of the park there, which is really maintaining that original concept with some of those earlier renders that I showed. Moving on from stage 1, we're currently in the process of designing the next stages, which on the left-hand image there is a 600-room 5-star Hilton with a major function and event centre in the podium, with 2 large ballrooms positioned in between the towers, clear of tower structure, so that we could have a free span ballroom. And then on the right hand side, the alternate elevation of the Hilton with the next residential tower next door. And then the workplace office tower on the main street and fronting the park as well. So sitting on either side of the park is the Hilton on the left-hand side of this image and the office tower on the right-hand side with the residential towers behind. And more recently, one of the projects that we've been lucky enough to be successful with and working through with a very aspirational client and our joint venture firm, UN Studio, was South Bank by Beulah, which has just been in the media recently for receiving its planning permit. But working with UN Studio, one of our key ideas at the start of the project was that the project should be uniquely Melbourne, and it should be designed as part of the city fabric rather than being a form that is simply placed into the city and not really responding to it. So drawing on things like the broader Melbourne network, but also the work that Melbourne City Council's been doing with the greening of South Bank Boulevard, and the idea that, again, similar to Melbourne Square, and that the public realm is such a key piece, and there's a great opportunity here to really give South Bank an improved public realm. So we could take something that could be easy and maximise the building footprint and height and have a large tower, or we could look to split that and get better view aspects for the towers themselves, but also allow for improved solar aspect through the towers and create a space in between where we could have elevated parks and function centres in the podium that would be free of the tower structures. And then looking at the idea of the green for South Bank and drawing on South Bank Boulevard, and maybe we take that idea and move that through the towers and twist that for orientation back to the park and gardens and the CBD, and actually take the idea of the public and the park right through the project. And then one of the very early concept massing renders. And some of the ultimate imagery that we prepared for the competition entry and subsequent planning application. So the idea of this highly activated and broken down podium that really encouraged the public to be using all levels of the podium for different reasons. So having an event centre that would draw people up away from the ground plane and into the building. And some of the early images of the green spine wrapping up and twisting through the project. And then at the other end of the scale, we've been working on the idea of really bringing the craft back to architecture and the idea of the guild, which bringing back the idea of making. And with that is a project that we've done recently called Tedesca. It's a little restaurant down near Red Hill, which was a really beautiful little project. And here's some photos of some of my colleagues making the main entry door into the restaurant. So piecing it together themselves and working on that and shaping the door to give this quite beautiful and unique entrance into the restaurant. And I think that's where I'll finish, Cameron.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to share my screen as a holding slide.
Hey, sorry, Cameron.
Do you want to unshare your screen? And I'll share mine.
Are you there, Cameron?
Yeah.
I can't hear you, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, can you unshare your screen?
Unshare?
Yeah, unshare, and then I'll put mine up. Then we can. There we go. Sorry. Thanks for that great presentation, Paul. It's very interesting in this period we've currently been working in. You're sitting in an empty office in Melbourne, where it's probably quite cold. I'm sitting in an almost empty office in Brisbane, where it's not quite as cold. And many of the interactions that we are having are people talking about how much they're missing the social. And so it was really kind of fascinating to see that you started by talking, I guess, in a way about some of the things we're missing about the nature of architecture practice, about its sociability. And I know that your office in Melbourne, and in particular the leadership team there at COX in Melbourne, are very social, and you enjoy great hospitality together. How important is that for you in terms of work-life balance, and about making the tough days easier because you're sharing you're sharing experiences with each other?
Yeah, look, incredibly important, and much more so in the world we live in now, in that we rely so heavily on the relationships that we have with each other to be able to work remotely away from one another. We really need to have that as a firm grounding of who we are and what we do. But we're already talking about when we can get back together in a big group and what that will mean. But certainly looking forward to it for sure.
Mm. So then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was a little about the way businesses evolve over time. So I think you'd be generation 3 in terms of the directors of COX.
Yes. Yep.
And that's a really interesting place to be. I mean, many people would say that generation 3 is the hardest generation. Not to scare you or anything about your responsibility to the future of the practice. But I wonder, without giving anything away about the nature of succession planning and the complexities of that, how you as a firm work hard to maintain the legacies of the firm, but also build new stories, new narratives.
Yeah, so we're very low hierarchy in that case, in that everybody in the office has a voice and an idea, and that could be a really good idea. So it's not our management structure is incredibly low, and we really treat each other like our peers and our colleagues. It really doesn't matter how much experience they have or how long they've been in the industry, but it's really working together as a team to get the best outcome, and that we're all friends and we all get along and we have a great time doing it, and it kind of all just works. So yeah, that's kind of how we go about it.
So many of the students who are online this evening are in the final weeks of their semester. Do you want to think back a little bit about your time here at UQ and that kind of end of semester hit? What advice would you give them as they embark on these last few weeks?
Oh, look, it's so different this year to anything I can imagine. I mean, we had days and nights 24/7 in the studio, which they're probably craving at the moment, working at home in isolation. I can't imagine it. But it's such an exciting time. You're on the home straight and you're about to get out into the world, and enjoy the next 6 months while you're at university. After that, everything becomes real and it just keeps getting more exciting.
How are you as a practice adjusting to this distributed environment?
Yeah, look, it's in all honesty, it's actually worked a lot better than what we could have imagined. So in the lead up, we obviously have some pretty good pieces of technology in the organisation. But in the lead up, we did start to put things in place before we had to. In that we actually had probably most of the office from all branches, all studios, able to work remotely, so that when the call was made that we had to be remote, we actually already had most people working remotely. Incredibly reliant on video conferencing and sketching up on the screen and whatnot, but the relationships that each of our studio teams have with one another is really important, so that they know what each other's doing and really getting together and just having a bit of a chat, really trying to make sure we maintain the social aspects of the office as well. Having different types of people and different groups coming in and presenting, and really just trying to encourage as much of that connectivity as we can.
From a technology point of view, has this period for you identified any limits in the technology in terms of things that don't work? I'm thinking particularly about the size and complexity of the projects, particularly the two South Bank projects that you showed us this evening. I imagine the digital modelling of those projects is huge and requires massive power. How's that worked?
Yeah, look, we're using many different forms of technology, whether it's remote desktoping or virtual desktop machines, and cloud computing for different things. Really, overall, it's actually been pretty good. There's probably degrees of varying issues that can happen now and then, whether it's somebody's home internet connection or something else, but that they're actually pretty small issues. And we did a practice-wide survey just recently to see what people thought, and I can't remember the exact percentages. We actually published it on the website. The actual percentage of people that thought they were continuing to work as they were able to in the office was really high. So it was pretty impressive to see.
So do you think that might mean for COX nationally that you might have some different policies around working from home or flexibility in the future?
Yeah, look, we already had a bit of a flexible approach in play, but I think for all businesses, no matter what industry they're in, I think it's really challenged everybody's thinking, and I think there's still a great need to connect and get together and have that relationship with your peers that you just can't have through a video conference. But I think there'll be many improvements and different ways of doing things when things get back to a new normal. So already different states are in different situations. So each of our different offices really have a little bit of a different working scenario at the moment.
I think that's what we're all trying to imagine at the moment, is what this new normal might be, what it looks like. It was interesting to hear you to talk about the globalization of your career, and in a way that the globalization of practice, despite the fact that you're headquartered in Melbourne, and that the international networks that come from collaborating with architects on projects in Christchurch or collaborating with practices from the Netherlands on projects in Melbourne. I mean, it's a very interesting and increasingly complex web of global practice. What do you think is the biggest opportunity? What's the biggest benefit we've got from or gained as a profession from practice moving in that direction?
Look, I think design doesn't happen in isolation, part one. So being able to work on projects all over the world opens up, different ways of thinking and different approaches. but also project opportunities. So, the project in Christchurch, that opportunity is unlike anything anywhere else in the world, in that bringing that many different groups together, and the complexities of all of the different brief components, from a custodial cell to a courtroom or a forensics lab through to an office space in one precinct, was just amazing. So it's opportunity, I think, is a massive part.
Mm. So I have a vested interest in the Beulah project, South Bank by Beulah, having I'll admit I was on the jury for that project with your client, selecting UN Studio and COX to deliver that project. And there's probably lots of that project journey over the last 18 months or so that you can't talk about. But can you tell us a little bit, or reflect a little bit about that? Because it must be an amazing kind of I bet it's a roller coaster from, getting the call to say your team had won, to getting the council or the state government approval, a month ago.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it?
It's been pretty amazing. I mean, the amount of PR that project has had around the world has just been incredible. And the Beulah team have been amazing. When the announcements were made, many of our studios had in the main spaces the live stream, and the office vibe when we had a couple of hundred people watching in one space, and the announcement was unbelievable. It was, the positivity was fantastic. And then obviously there's been a long journey through there since then, and working with the team from the UN have been great. Culturally, it's been a really good fit. Guys have been great. We're in conversation with them every couple of days for whatever it is, whether it's just a touch point or a workshop or session on the project. Ultimately, though, a lot of the design principles and concepts have maintained to be true right through to the submission, and getting the permits. As you said, 4 or 6 weeks ago was a great thing to achieve as well. So currently working through next steps and watch this space.
Fantastic. We have one last question from the panel, which is about I guess the outcomes of this period of remote working, and whether you think there's certain things that we've been doing over the last 3 months that might shape the future of practice.
Yeah, look, I think we in Melbourne, I think we'll be working in different locations more. Getting together in groups in different places. We can have a design workshop down at Red Hill or Mornington Peninsula. We can head to the south coast of New South Wales and have a couple of days on a project, and we're less reliant on all being in one space, but at the same time, that one space for us all to get together is incredibly important as well.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be different.
Paul, it's been brilliant to catch up tonight and to hear about what you and the practice have been up to of recent times. This has been a really great opportunity over the last few weeks through these webinars to catch up with our most distinguished alum. And so I really want to thank you for your generosity in sharing your thoughts and your time with us this evening. This is part of a series, and the next one will be presented by Dr. Shanine Fanton from POD in Cairns on the 11th of June at midday. So I'd encourage attendees to come along to the next session. Paul, as you might know, these are also being videoed. So your presentation and our conversation this evening will also be available to our wide alumni network to share over the coming weeks and years. So a great way to continue that conversation about the journey of our alum after graduation. I'd also like, in closing, just to thank the valuable donors to our Student Culture and Experience Fund, our champions, Rothy Lohman, and our advocates, Nettleton Tribe, BVN, and Populous. Paul, thanks again for your presentation. Thank you everyone for participating this evening. We look forward to seeing you at next week's presentation. Have a great night.